So, I'm also very excited to get to talk to you about pigs because this is, I have to admit, one of my favorite species, although I don't get to see them very often anymore, right? What happens is that I get contacted by people all over the country, honestly all over the world, because my name just happened to get out there early on. I've written a lot about pigs, and so I hear from people everywhere that have questions about pigs, and they're so lacking in good resources. Either they can't find veterinarians, they can't find trainers to help them, they're just always desperate to get more information. So there are people out there who would take advantage, I believe, of a trainer willing to see these pigs. And I think what you're going to find is that once you have an understanding of just some basic concepts of who this little creature is, I think you really can help people, because we all know learning principles apply to all species, right? There's nothing that unique about them that you can't apply what you know to them. But just by way of introduction, let's talk about what it is or who it is we're talking about. And initially in the late 1980s, what got me into pot-bellied pig, or into miniature pigs or pet pigs, was the Vietnamese pot-bellied pig. So this was the little miniature pig that was the big deal in the late 80s, early 90s. People called them the yuppie puppy. This was going to be the newest house pet, you know, just the big deal. And they spent thousands on this animal. But what people didn't realize is, even though these guys were really, really cute little pigs, when they were babies, they still grew up to be pretty good sized pigs when they became adults. But a good sized pot-bellied pig looks kind of like this, and I'm going to show you lots of different pictures. And what sadly most city folk don't understand is that a commercial pig is more like this. So really, miniature pet pigs, the miniature pot-bellied pig, was really a pretty darn small pig. But if, like one of my clients told me, to her, a miniature pet was like a toy poodle. So when her parents gave her as a present a miniature pig, and she found out that it was going to be the size of a Rottweiler, she was not happy, because that's not what she perceived a miniature pet to be. So a big thing that was a problem for these guys was that perception. So what people thought they were getting was not what they were getting, and that was a big deal. Still, these pigs are very popular with a lot of people. If you love pigs, and if you know anything about pigs, there's a lot to love, and I do love pigs. This is a great way to have a pig, okay, because they can come in the house. They can live in the house with you. These guys can live 15 to 20 years, okay? The average lifespan for a commercial pig is like 8 years. I had to euthanize my commercial pet pig at about 10 years of age due to arthritis, because those guys weren't bred to live that long. Nevertheless, this is still a pig, okay? So it's really a lot like any animal you're going to deal with. You want to learn who is the ancestor of this animal, how would they live, what would they be doing if they weren't living with us, right? What's their background? And it really tells you everything you need to know. And so if you understand the ancestor of pigs and where they come from and what they do, then you will understand the normal behavior of these animals and what they need to be kept happy and healthy. And it is a little challenging, but not impossible. To say a few more words about the miniature pig, and I don't mean to belabor this, but it is important, because what we saw was this huge rise in the 80s, early 90s, and then sort of a crash because people began to realize, oh, these aren't what we thought they were. And in the late 90s, when I started seeing less, and then when I started limiting my practice to behavior, a lot of people would say, oh, the pig fad is over. There are not any pigs out there. And I'm like, well, no, really. They're out there. They're out there by the hundreds in pig sanctuaries and shelters, which is where they got dumped. But what was kind of sad to me is starting again in sort of, let's say maybe the mid-2000s, I started hearing from people again. I started getting those calls and getting those email contacts from people who said, well, I hear you know about pigs, and I just got a teacup pig, or I just got a mini pig, or I forget all the crazy names that people, and all of a sudden, everything that was old is new again. And I was reminded of, was it P.T. Barnum that says a sucker's born every minute? Or that we are destined to relive history. Like, why did people not learn? But apparently we had a whole new generation of suckers. And we have a whole new generation of people selling these little pigs and insisting that they are going to be tiny. And if you go online and search for them, you will find the people out there selling these little pigs. And my challenge to you, and my challenge to all audiences who I talk to about pigs, is if you can bring me a 3-year-old or over pig or picture, show me living proof of a 3-year-old pig that weighs 70 pounds or less, please do so as soon as possible. Because until I see it, I do not believe they're out there, okay? But that's what's being sold. Worse, people are being told that they will be 40 and 50 pounds. And I'll show you what those look like in a minute. The truth is most miniature pigs weigh, if they're in really good health and really good form, they might weigh 80 to 100 pounds. And that's an awesome pig. And I'll show you some really beautiful examples. But 150 to 200 is common for pigs that are overweight or for pigs that are just not of good pot-bellied pig breeding stock, okay? I think some of them look like there was a little bit of Yorkshire mixed in there, okay? So we need to understand that. What makes it easy for people to do this, to unsuspecting pig lovers, is that miniature pigs can have their first litter of babies by the time they're about 6 months old. So they come into heat and breed very early. So you can walk into a breeder's facility and see a lovely mother pig with all her litter of little darling piglets, and she can be 40 or 50 pounds. And think, wow, that's awesome. I'm gonna have me a 40 or 50 pound little pig living in my house. But what we don't get told by the breeders, accidentally, is that pigs continue to grow, truthfully, their whole life, but at least until they're 2 to 3 years of age. And most of the time, those little 6-month to 8 or 9-month-old females will continue to grow, and by the time they're a couple of years of age, they're gonna be about 100 pounds, okay? So this is how that tends to happen, and unfortunately, they then send them home with people and tell people, so yeah, this adorable little thing who's probably a few days old, he gets sent home with somebody and they're told to feed him 3 tablespoons of food a day, period. That is not a healthy animal. And the reason why I give you my challenge is because every time I've ever been presented with a pig and been told that, oh, this is a micro mini pig, it's been a little baby dying, seizing, hypoglycemic, and I've yet to see one live. Okay, and they look like this. Or they're in sanctuaries having been abandoned because they're ill, deformed. I mean, I have so many pictures of pathetic pigs like that. We could spend an hour talking about it, but I said I wouldn't belabor it, so I'll get off my soapbox. If you get the opportunity, just be sure that you are able to educate people about those 2 ideas, right? Pigs can have babies as early as 6 months of age, and then they grow for the next 2 to 3 years of their life. Okay, so let's talk about how pigs perceive the world, because it's a little bit different from a lot of animals, and I believe in understanding how an animal perceives the world to help us better communicate with them, right? It helps to know what the world looks like through their eyes as best we can, right? So I don't think it comes as any surprise to most people to be told that The sense of smell in the pig is amazing. Most of us know that that little rooter is what makes them so unique. You've heard stories of them being used to find truffles and things like that. There was even a time when they considered trying to make pigs drug-sniffing or bomb-sniffing animals until they discovered that they're just not the most committed animals to working for people. That's a whole other thing we can talk about. But they do have an amazing sense of smell, and that is, of course, associated with the fact that they are pretty much evolved from a forest-dwelling animal, not nocturnal, although they will become nocturnal in the heat. They tend to eat mostly in the early morning hours and the evening hours. And they use their smell to find food, but also it's a really important part of recognition of conspecifics. So like many of our social mammals, they use their sense of smell to know if you belong in my group or not, okay? And whether or not you belong in the group is important because if you don't, you can get your little tail kicked. And of course, it's important to recognize that a predator is nearby because pigs are definitely prey animals. And that's important to keep in mind. Remember, dogs, not prey, ever. Cats, unique in the fact that they probably are considered a predator and prey. Pigs are prey animals. And that's going to definitely play a role in their behavior in our home. Their vision is plays an interesting role in our interactions with them, especially in the pet pig because, and I promised you I would show you some variety of pictures, this is what a lot of pet pigs end up looking like. Okay? This pig's vision is not very good, but that's not a natural phenomena, right? His vision's not good because he's too fat. And the fat on his face keeps him from being able to open his eyes and see well. But pigs don't have great vision naturally. They don't have really good close-up vision, okay? They don't accommodate well. So in what's called the Snellen method of accounting for vision, where you've heard the term 20/20, right? Pigs have 20/200 vision. 20/200 vision. What this means is what we can see at 200 yards has to be at 20 yards for a pig to see. So that gives you some comparison. So they don't see well at a distance. This is why they need a good sense of smell, right, to recognize a predator coming. Nevertheless, they can see color and they can discriminate between people, and pigs are notorious for remembering people for how they've been treated. They probably actually remember people's faces as well, but it's been shown that how people are dressed, like you put people in different uniforms, and they recognize them based on how they're dressed, and they will remember them. But again, it's not critical for recognizing conspecifics. Their olfaction is much more important. And because they don't have this great sense of smell, and you combine that with this sort of unique, sort of stout little sausage-like body, if you, again, just look at their face and think about dogs and how expressive their face, the muscles on their face allow their eyebrows and their eyes and their ears to move. Pigs can't do that. They don't have a lot of expression to their face, which means they don't need their vision to read a lot of body cues, so they don't have a lot of visual cues. The visual cues that have been determined in pigs are really subtle, and it makes observing pigs actually quite fascinating because their visual cues can be so subtle and hard to read. So not a whole lot of expression there, not a lot that we can determine just by watching a pig's body language. And by the way, this is at this time one of the best, in recent times, one of the best size, temperament, conformation pigs that I know of. And he actually came from a breeder in Texas, and sadly she's not breeding anymore, but she used to be one of my favorite breeders. But I think that little guy is probably still not over 80 pounds. So again, compare him to the previous pig and you see he's of a nice weight. He has the nice traditional conformation of the sway back and the round belly without having too short a face, which, again, think brachiocephalic dogs, all of the same health problems applied. We really worried when we started seeing these guys get too short in the face because we had a lot of similar health problems. So that's sort of what a good potbelly pig should look like, if you ever want to find one. This guy actually, and just occurred to me, same breeder. And this is again from the early or mid-90s, I guess. This was one of her prize boars. I put the picture up there to show you the example of piloerection. But that's what a nice prize-winning pot-bellied pig boar looked like at the time. Again, not too short a face, but still typical traditional face with the nice round belly, and a big ruff of hair over his back, and lovely tempered pig. I mean, this is what showed us how important good breeding was with these pigs, okay? Because I never saw any of her pigs for aggression. We're going to talk about aggression later. But this is mostly to talk to you about piloerection, because one of the things that they do demonstrate when it comes to just visual cues is piloerection when they're aroused. And it can be very, very visual, obviously. Most of the time you see it when they're really liking something. So they like a good scrub somewhere on their shoulders or neck or belly, they'll put their hair up. But they will also put their hair up sometimes when they're being aggressive. So just like in dogs, that can simply be associated with arousal, of any type. But that is one visual cue they show us. Another thing can be tail posture. And one of the fun things about pot-bellied pigs is, unlike our commercial swine, these guys don't have cut-off tails. They have nice long tails, and they wag all the time. And again, one of the things I found very charming about the miniature pig is they're always happy wagging tails. And I think the only time I've ever seen their tails stop wagging is when they're eliminating and when one froze for a very brief second right before he charged me. So again, very subtle, very limited body cues, visual cues, but something to keep in mind. So that little wagging tail is always there, but it doesn't move up or down a lot like a dog's will. There's just not a lot of variability in it. It's either flapping wildly or it's slow, like I said, when they eliminate, or it can be kind of still. Otherwise, not a whole lot of variation there. Body posture, generally speaking, it was mostly to remind me to talk about whether they're cold or hot. In commercial swine, how pigs lie together is a really big aspect of understanding or recognizing their degree of comfort. Pigs like to lie together touching. It is one thing about them that kind of is displays how social they are, that they like to touch. They don't do a lot of social grooming. Obviously, they don't have the mouth or the toes or fingers for doing things like primates do, which is, again, another interesting aspect of their social behavior. So they just touch. They like to lie touching. But if you see pigs piled up on each other, they're probably too cold, right? So you see baby pigs all piled up in a pile, it is a suggestion that they are too cold. If you saw two pigs that you knew were very companionable out in the yard and they're not touching, they're laying very far distance away, you might want to consider that they're very hot, because usually if they can, they will lie touching. But what I also find interesting, and I don't have the science to back this up, it's a study I always thought would be fun to do, I always had the perception that this was the most common position for pigs to lie in, though, that they were more often head to snout than they were head to head. Just a perception. But it makes so much sense because you also will get the feeling, if you're around pigs enough, that they really don't like their face messed with. And to me, it's almost like, I want to be near you, right? I want to be next to you, but don't mess with my face. Don't get too close to my face. So it's kind of an interesting theory to keep in mind. Their hearing is also quite amazing. So they hear well. Again, they need that to recognize predators. Since they can't see them coming, they need to be able to hear them. But also because they have extensive vocalizations, they're going to communicate a lot with conspecifics, so they need to be able to hear well. One of the fun things about pigs is that probably next to the cat, I think, their vocalizations have been studied more extensively than any other domestic animal and have been discovered, to be very, very complex. They have this really wide array of vocalizations from very deep grunts, and it sort of progresses to squeals, screams, and basically going up in pitch and becoming closer in, repetitiveness. And it depends on, it's almost predictable with the intensity of the situation or the level of fear. So a pig that's very relaxed, walking along, in fact, my husband used to jokingly tell people, because he worked with me in my practice, that he would say, you know that pigs' vocal cords are attached to their back legs, don't you? And they go, really? Just kidding. But because it seemed like they could not walk without. And I used to say that was the sweetest sound in the world to me in the clinic, was hearing a pig walking in the waiting room, because they walk. It's like everywhere they walk, it's like this little soft grunting. And when they forage, it's with these occasional quiet grunts. So there's a certain amount of just, again, every day, just communicating with each other, these very soft grunts. The faster those grunts come, the more aroused they become, the harsher they will get. So pigs will do a bark when they get upset, okay? And I've heard that before too. Basically, they will just become more rapid and again become higher pitched the more excited or the more upset they get. And you're more likely to hear those screams in a very, very distressed pig, okay? And squeals. And more likely to hear them in babies, but again, squeals especially in a very, very distressed baby, but screams in very, very distressed pigs that are being chased, something I don't recommend you do. So it's just kind of a general way to know. If a pig's vocalizations are starting to rise, then you know they're becoming distressed. And that's most helpful, I find, in the veterinary situation. If you're trying to do low stress handling, you don't want to hear that, right? You want to keep it down. So let's talk about social behavior, because this plays such an enormous role in how well or how poorly this animal is going to adapt to living in the house with people. Pigs have some very unique aspects to their social behavior. Again, to me, this is what I love about them. It's what makes them interesting to study, but it's also what makes them very challenging, because they are very unique from dogs and cats in this respect. Unlike pretty much any other domesticated animal we have, pigs are born into this world fighting. Fighting rather aggressively for their food. So they are born with weapons. Very few other of our little domesticated animals are born with weapons. These guys are born with fully erupted canine teeth that are quite sharp. And in fact, this is why commercial pig farmers cut the teeth on baby pigs, because they can cause so much damage to the mother's teats. But they are born with those, and they use them in the first day or two after birth, because remember, these guys hit the ground running. They are the poster child for precocious offspring, right? They hit the ground running, and they begin fighting for the most productive teat. And like I said, they do it pretty aggressively. And once they have established what is called a teat order, they keep that teat. It's like they stamp their name on it, right? And that's their teat for the remainder of the time that they nurse. And once that teat order is established, then there is less physical aggression. But in the beginning, there's a good bit of physical aggression. And there's a lot of studies on this phenomenon that's shown, for example, that the piglet that gets the best, most productive teats, and those are usually the anterior teats of the sow, grow up to be the biggest, toughest piglet, okay, or the biggest, toughest pig. And typically the biggest piglet that's born is the one that acquires the best teats. So they just kind of live. So you have a runt, he usually stays a runt because he's not big enough and strong enough to fight and get the best teat. So it's something to keep in mind about the pig, okay? This is their nature to be rather physical. Again, I don't like terms like mean or really even aggressive or violent, but they use physical conflict to establish a dominance hierarchy. That's what they do. Once it's established, they use these subtle visual cues to maintain it, but they are very subtle. So forever after, and unfortunately in commercial swine raising, it's very common that once you wean these babies, you then separate them, and they have, I don't know that much about commercial swine raising anymore because it changed over the years, but they do tend to separate pigs into groups based on weight and size and that sort of thing. So they take these little piglets after they've established their teat order and remix them again. Sometimes they're remixed again later in life. And every time pigs are remixed with new pigs, they have to fight again to establish a hierarchy, okay? So dominance is not a dirty word. I think if you listen to Erica, I think she did a really great job of talking about what dominance really means. It's about a relationship, and that's what pigs do. They establish this dominance relationship. They do have to do it every time they meet a new individual. Once it's established, everything's cool. Some of the interesting things that have been learned in studying commercial swine is that when you put two pigs together, if there is greater disparity in size and probably strength, those two probably go along together, there will be less fighting. So again, they're not dumb. If they can look at each other and say, oh, he's a lot bigger than me, I'm not going to fight that much, you know, then they won't. The fighting will be brief, and they'll go, okay, cool, you're the boss, you're bigger, okay? But when they are very close to the same size, the fighting can be much more intense, and they can really harm each other. But again, the relationships are usually reinforced by subtle cues, and at the time that I did a lot of this work, I didn't have a good video camera, but one of the ways in which pigs fight, and this has kind of is why they probably have these really tough skin over their neck and thick skin over their neck, is when they tend to kind of circle and charge and bite each other around their neck. And I do have a little bit of video of pigs fighting. But these two guys had been put in a pen together at a sanctuary because they were trying to get them introduced and get them to be together. And they're kind of circling. You know, their hair's up, they're circling, they're still wagging their tails, and they're kind of sizing each other up. And that's the way they fight. And sometimes they'll do a little bit of charging and biting at each other's neck and jowl area, settle it pretty quickly. But sometimes they can go back and forth fighting off and on for a few days. They can take several days to establish that hierarchy. And they're not going to fight the whole time, but oops, don't do that. There we go. This is a really fun video. Before I get into it, what did you see The pig on the right duck its head away. I have to show you again. Watch it really close because, and then lift its head up. I'm going to do one more time. Okay, watch these pigs meet. The approaching pig, he walks up. The pig on the right turn his head away. Little sniff. Lift his head up. Okay? Very subtle little signs that are probably deferential. Probably. So these are pigs on a farm that get to live on a range. And I think there's a couple of other, oh wait, here he comes, yeah. So this is the same pig coming down to this group. You can see he's a big boar. And it's just kind of interesting to watch some of the interactions. Again, physical conflict is not needed now because they have established a relationship. Did you see the little pop of the head of the one he just met? It's just interesting because it shows, again, how subtle these visual cues may be and why it took a very, very long time for animal scientists and behaviorists to really start to recognize some of these signs. Not to mention probably because we keep pigs in such unnatural ways usually, but, and it's hard to observe pigs in the wild this easily. Pigs blowing bubbles, just for fun. One of the things that's interesting about pigs, and just to keep in mind if you do meet people who have 2 pigs in a household having aggression problems, avoidance behavior is a very important aspect of them avoiding conflict, right? So basically they need to be able to get away from each other. That's probably not that unusual, right? But it's why they have seen in commercial swine when they are mixing pigs, if too many pigs are mixed in too small of an area, you have a lot more fighting, okay? When they're through establishing their hierarchy, they need to be able to avoid each other in order to keep the conflict down, okay? So there's just a certain amount of mutual avoidance, or again, just that subtle sort of, fine, I'll stay out of your way, that needs to be able to go on. And that's why I kind of added this picture. Again, these pigs were not confined to this small of an area. They came up here to eat. But it's a good example of how, this would not be natural for pigs to live in this tight of association with each other, okay? They don't have the opportunity for avoidance, okay? So there would be a greater incidence of aggressive threats if pigs had to live in this kind of crowded situation all the time. This is one of our sanctuaries up near Dallas many years ago. Some of the challenges associated with keeping pigs in groups, and really this could be, again, 2 or 3 when I say that, because one of the things we learned is if you love pigs and you have one, doesn't take long for many of these people, they wanted to have 2 or 3. It was very common. Retaliatory aggression is relatively common in groups of pigs. So where in many other social orders where you have a dominance relationship, a subordinate animal will often not issue challenges, right? They'll just stay, oh, okay, fine, we have this relationship and I'm not gonna threaten you. In pigs, that's not necessarily the case. Okay, subordinate animals will often go around threatening back at a dominant individual. A dominant individual threatens them, they may snap back. That goes on, they get away with that. So there's just, again, a little bit more physical conflict that does go on in these groups than in others. Similar to other groups of animals, you may have encountered this in cats. If you take one away, let's say one goes to the vet, and I had to deal with this on occasion. He's gone for a day, or maybe 2 or 3, and then he goes home. All of a sudden, he's a stranger, right? And what do pigs do to strangers? They attack them, okay? So this can be a problem. I mentioned already, again, minimal social grooming. So again, pigs don't have a lot of those nice behaviors in place for establishing and maintaining social cohesiveness. A lot of those nice things that some social animals do, like grooming each other. So it's a little harder, probably, for them to maintain that social cohesiveness. Moving on, I'm going to kind of come back to actual behavior problems after I talk about normal. So moving on to ingestive behavior, just a couple of tips. Again, there's only so much we can talk about in an hour. One of the things that's really interesting about pigs and kind of unique to them, and maybe the rat actually if you're interested, is they eat and drink until they are full. So drinking does not so much appear to be in response to osmotic cues in their body that says you're thirsty, but basically they will drink to fill their belly. So an interesting secondary problem you can imagine we have when people decide to feed their new pig these minuscule amounts of food because they're trying to keep them little, is then they drink all the time. And what happens when you have a little animal that you're having to house train that drinks all the time? They pee a lot. And then that makes it really difficult to house train them. So this was something we discovered early on. They can be house trained. The rules are a little bit different. We're going to talk about that. But it's really hard to house train them if they're PUPD, right? If they're drinking and peeing more than normal. So that's just something to keep in mind. They're kind of weird about this. Pigs will even, they will also be very messy. They will eat, drink, eat, drink, eat, drink. And a lot of people would complain about that. He's such a mess. What do I do? And I'd be like, feed him outside, or buy a big tray and feed him in it. I had clients that sold, actually I think that was actually his litter pan in the beginning, but some people just buy big trays to feed them in. And I know somebody that fed their pig in their walk-in shower. Food and water in the walk-in shower, yeah, so it's really easy to clean up. Fine, it's about management, right? Because this is what the pig does. I knew people that would try to limit their water. I'm like, no, you can't do that. He wants to eat and drink at the same time. You find a place to do that, or where he can do that. Another really important aspect of pig behavior that probably got them into more trouble than anything is, of course, their exploratory behavior. Pigs have an enormous drive to explore. Time budgets in the wild entail primarily foraging, exploring, eating, and then a little bit of sleeping. Okay, so in the wild, pigs would spend most of their time exploring their environment. Okay, kind of like that horse that walks and eat, walks and eat, walks and eat. That's a lot what they're doing. Okay, and they're doing it with this fantastic nose. Okay, it's amazing nose. When you think about it from an evolutionary point of view, it's amazing. Very unique. They said it's as sensitive as a fingertip. Okay, that little olfactory pad. But they evolved to explore with this nose. And I have had reports of pigs removing linoleum tile, wallpaper, sheetrock. I had somebody tell me they came home one day and they're like, where is the pig? And then they see the lump under the carpet in the middle of the living room. Okay? It's amazing what they can do with that nose. And they can be very destructive. So people need to be aware of that. They need a pig-proof space, or they need to be prepared for the pig to live outdoors. And if the pig lives outdoors, they need to be prepared to not have a wonderful, yard and garden from Southern living, okay? If he lives indoors, his space needs to be pig-proofed, and this is just one example. This is the same pig as in the previous picture. I don't know if you can just barely see the little plastic, but she had an entire room in her house. And when he was young, it started out with a little plastic child gates, I guess, like a little plastic child yard, or maybe they were like a little plastic X-pen, basically set up to give him a small area, and the bigger he got, the bigger his yard got, until he had most of the room. And the flooring, she protected the carpet for the most part, and she provided him with a lot of things to do so that he did not destroy the carpet, and he did not destroy too much of the walls, okay? Because he had lots of other things to do. And this is one example I'll point out here before I move on. And this is what we call a rooting box. And she has just taken a plastic Tupperware container, cut the side out to make it easy for him to get in, and put large river rocks in there. And basically you sprinkle food in there, treats. I recommend for some pigs you can feed every meal in a rooting box, or you can just throw treats in there a couple of times a day, whatever it takes to keep them going back in there and visiting it. The same owner, she was amazingly creative. She was a trainer also. So she did a wonderful job with this pig. She really invested in him. But she managed to go to, I think, Toys R Us and get these little balls like you get at like you see in the big bouncy castles or whatever. And this was his other foraging box, as you can see, in a plastic wading pool. And she would throw treats in there for him. But you don't always have to be that fancy. I thought I had more pictures than this even, but this pig just has a pile of blankets. So a lot of people would give their pig stuffed toys. I knew somebody whose pig loved a beanbag chair that he pushed all over the house, but one day he broke it open. That was not fun to come home to, I don't think. But blankets, and of course, when outside, things like straw, but indoors, newspapers even. They love to shred and tear up newspapers if you don't mind cleaning up the mess. Anything that they can push around and root with their nose is really a wonderful way of basically enriching their environment, because it allows them to do what they are bred, or what they evolved to do, which is explore their environment with their nose. And ideally, if they can experience acquiring food at the same time, that's even better. Again, these pig people are mostly feeding their pigs in a bowl in what takes them 5 minutes twice a day to eat, right? And I would tell them, don't do that. If nothing else, throw that food out in the yard and let them eat it out of the grass. Yes?
Does it work well to use those dog food puzzles?
Yes. And that's the other thing. I mean, this, again, some of these pigs were seen back before we had that. I remember my first owner that took one of those hamster balls, and drilled holes in it and used it to feed his pig. So yes, any kind of dog foraging toy that's tough enough to hold pig kibble and the pig can roll it around is fantastic. And a lot of people do homemade things too. So a variety of textures, just really like a puppy, having a variety of different textures and surfaces, especially when they're little, for them to push around and nudge around, as well as things that dispense food, are all a great way to direct that desire, because it is a critical aspect of their development. And one of the things that was really distressing to me was how many of these pigs I saw early on that had rings in their nose. So people, at the time, veterinarians said, oh, we'll just put a ring in their nose. Well, I saw a pig once that had like 6 rings across its nose, because you put a ring here, well, they just learn to root there. And you put one there, well, then they just learn to root there. And it was really sad. Elimination behavior. Again, just a few aspects of this behavior that will help you to help people that you want to know. These guys have some natural tendencies to eliminate away from where they rest, away from where they eat and drink, although if they have to make a choice, they would prefer to eliminate away from where they rest first. They will eliminate near where they eat if they have to. But again, it's ideal if we don't make them make that choice. Okay? They need to have enough space that they can make that choice. And this is where a lot of people got into trouble early on, is trying to house train them like puppies, putting them in a little crate, with a little litter box in it, well, they wouldn't go in the litter box. And then if you let them out, when you get home and just let them run around the house, which a lot of people would do, well, then they just go find someplace away to eliminate because they have such a strong desire to get away from where they're resting, okay? They also have a very strong desire to eliminate next to a wall or in a corner, although I've seen them just choose anything. If they can get under something, they will do that as well in a home. But this is very notable in piggeries, in commercial swine room, that they'll go into a corner or against a wall. So those, again, are things you can use if you have a home, a place where you can put their litter pan against a wall or in a corner. That can help. And you can train these guys to a litter pan, especially early on. Again, if you have somebody that works all day and just has to come home at lunch, you can train them to use a litter pan, but they need a little bit bigger space than just your typical dog crate. And that's why this worked so well for this young woman, because she was able to give him this restricted space with a litter pan, with a resting area, with his food and water and all his toys, and he used his litter pan. I swear, as soon as they get old enough to hold it, they will hold it to go outside. They seem to have a very strong desire to get out in the grass, which is kind of interesting. I don't know that we have a lot of data about pig, substrate preference development, anything like that. But they do just seem to have this natural desire to go outside. That's what I have seen. But this, again, is just another example of what somebody did in their house with their pigs. So again, they just built a big box that she lived in when she was young and when they left her at home. There's her litter pan. But again, the problem that you get into, and this may be why so many decide to try to hold it and go outside, is these pans get little for a big pig, okay? And we always talk about giving even a cat a big enough box that they can go in and stretch out and turn around. Well, these pigs can barely get in some of these boxes, right? So I tell people, if you want your pig to continue to be trained to a box and stay in the house, you better be prepared to give them a really big box. And this, again, just an example, this is maybe going to work for a piglet, but not for a full-grown pig. With a full-grown pig, you're going to have to get really creative. This is just the bottom half of a dog house. That was a good suggestion somebody tried. It worked pretty well for their large pig, but the best thing a lot of people ended up using, those big plastic wading pools. It takes something that big for a lot of these big pigs. And again, you may have to cut a side down because these guys have little short legs. Just like really a cat, we need to make that box easy for them to get into. If it's awkward, if it's uncomfortable, they may decide not to use it, okay? They want something comfortable. And this is, of course, their favorite thing to do with a wading pool. But, okay, so that's sort of your normals. Let's talk about what some of the common problems are that I saw in practice. Sadly, one of the most common problems that I began being presented with when I was in practice was aggression towards people. And we also saw aggression towards other pigs. Like I said, people would go, oh, this is so much fun. I love this pig. He needs a friend. And then, of course, they were horrified when their pig immediately tried to kill his new friend. There's sometimes aggression towards other pets, although the most common problems had to do with other pets being aggressive towards the pigs, and we'll talk about that. And then, as I said, destruction in the home and the yard was probably a biggie, and house soiling. Let's talk about aggression. I was very fascinated by this issue. Of course, this is right about the time when I was starting to look at becoming a specialist in behavior and doing my residency. So when I got to my residency, I really wanted to do something. So we conceived of this study online, and we put a questionnaire online, and I just wanted to collect some data. Because in all the years I'd been seeing pigs, we had all these theories, right? oh, these pigs are more aggressive because they're weaned too early. That is very common, right? People weaning these little pigs at 3 and 4 weeks of age. Or, you know, they're aggressive because they're kept in the house. Or they're aggressive, we had a lot of different thoughts about why they might be aggressive. So we said, well, let's check and see what we can find out if we do a study. So we started out by simply asking a question, and I learned a lot about making surveys by doing this. One of the questions I asked was, has your pig ever snapped at, charged, or bitten a person? And in this survey, 64% of the people said yes. Now, we understood that that could be, you know, the vet, right, a few times. That could be the boyfriend once because he scared him, right? So we then did break it down. How often, right? Does it happen regularly? Something that happens, you know, once a week, once a month? Or did it only happen once or twice? Well, even then, 33% of them were those, it happened once or twice in the pig's life, right? 31% of them regularly happened more than once a month that these pigs were aggressive, okay? I would say that's a problem, right? That's a concern. And one of the reasons it was important, and I wanted to show this, because this was actually the owner of the perfect pig I showed you, the one that I think is so beautiful, and this was accidental, okay? So these guys do have tusks, and they can hurt people accidentally. This would be a little bit like, you know, reaching your hand in the middle of a dog fight and accidentally getting bitten. This guy just did it, you know, turning around really fast with her foot too close in the way, and he scratched her with his tusk. But again, we were more concerned about the pigs that did it regularly. And what happened is that pigs, I guess just to give you a little bit more description about what happens, is that they begin by threatening people with what I would call a head toss, sort of that open-mouthed, what looked like an attempt to bite, that often did not ever result in a bite, right? But just like with dogs, we would know that's a threat, right? So the pig's threatening you. And if you left that, you know, if you didn't respond to that, it very often escalated to actual biting and charging. And in many cases, the first incidents of this threatening behavior did happen to visitors in the home. But it often then progressed to people that lived in the home as well, to the owners. But some of the things we found, and there was a lot of data, so I'm having to just kind of cram some of it together. This did get published. If you want to look at it, I'll share it with you. The most interesting thing we found, because we couldn't find any associations. We couldn't find associations with weaning. We couldn't find associations with, you know, not having enough enrichment or being limited to the house. But this was the most fascinating association that we found, was that there was a significant association with aggression in pigs that lived alone. Now, we can't say that, oh, well, the people that had, you know, single pigs got a second pig, and so they never had aggression just because they had two pigs and two pigs always played together. You know, it doesn't have to be a correlation, right? But it was very interesting. And that's sort of what it looked like. So again, whether it was the high frequency happening more than once a month, or what I grouped into low frequency, anything that happened less than once a month, it was significantly more likely to occur in single pig households. So again, it may have been a little bit of a, interesting. But it further convinced a lot of these sanctuaries, I think to this day, they try to avoid adopting out single pigs. They try to adopt 2 pigs at a time. And if you look at it purely from a welfare point of view, that's probably not a bad idea. This is definitely an animal that would never be alone in the wild, ever. Okay? They always live together in groups, so something to think about. The other thing we found, again, just to kind of know what the the epidemiology of it was, and is that it did typically occur at 6 to 30 months of age. So on average, this always happened in pigs before they reached what we consider probably social development or social maturity, which again wasn't surprising. What we still ponder over is, what do you call this? And no matter what I say about, pigs having this, more likely to engage in this physical conflict, and yes, their social grouping is very much hierarchical related, dominance related. Again, I don't think animals are stupid. I don't think dogs look at us and think we're a dog. I don't think pigs look at us and think we're pigs. But I do suspect that they, like all animals, they have only a limited way in which to communicate with us. And it's the only way they know how, right? It's the way that they would communicate with others. And I think in their limited ability to have social interactions, I do suspect that when they have a stranger come into their home, they use this method of interacting with a stranger that they would use to interact with a strange pig. I think it's all they know. And I think if people don't build a relationship with their pig based on trust and confidence and just, again, sound leadership, I guess, that you're going to have a pig using this physical interactions to get what it wants, right? They will bite because you try to move them off of the bed or because you try to go into their room. That's one of the other things. We can talk about territorial related. So they do tend, and this is actually something you also see in the wild, is that the only time pigs are really aggressive about territory is usually when they're nesting. So they will be territorial about a nest. So in some situations, do we think these pigs are, again, resource guarding a nest or a territory? Because people do often give them nice little beds like this. Many pigs will make a bed out of the, people will often give them areas like a bathroom, a laundry room, a big walk-in closet, things like that, and will make their bedding area in there, and then they will begin to guard it, and they won't want to let people come in there. So maybe it's a type of territorial related behavior. But unlike a lot of animals, I don't get this as being fear very often. I have recently seen a case that I think is fear related. But it seemed to develop from a trainer using punishment on the pig, and now the pig aggresses towards her in what appears to be a much more fear-related sort of reactive type of way, like, don't come near me. So I'm not going to say this never happens, but I don't think it's the norm. Again, can I be proven wrong? Yes, because these guys don't show us a lot with their body language. But this is an animal that normally, when they're afraid, they run away. Again, they're prey animals. They run, they scream. They don't, silently charge you. And having been on the other end of a silent charging pig, I've had the bruises to show for it. It's unique. But I'm also one of those people at some point I say, I don't really care what we call it. Like I said earlier, our principles apply. I talk to my owners when I counsel them a lot about Susan Friedman's work, and I'm like, let's put good stuff in the bank and just try to avoid taking stuff out. So I'm all about clicker training these guys, giving them some skills very early on, teaching them that if they just respond to little things I ask them to do, great stuff's going to happen. That's really all. So, of course, in the very beginning, if you're lucky enough to catch them early, lots of habituation, lots of positive, classical conditioning, habituation to handling. They all should be harness and leash trained. And again, this is harder when they're going to call you when these pigs are already 100 pounds and won't let them go into their, bathroom. And that's a little harder, but they can still be clicker trained. And I have somebody I consulted with recently that the pig was so bad, I said, well, work with it. Just, again, think zoo animals. Put a gate between you and just do it hands off. He can still learn. But after this, if you've had a long history of punishment with these animals, I think it's going to take a long history of building a relationship back up. And unfortunately, that's what happens with a lot of these cases. When it comes to interacting with visitors, again, if I can consult people early on, I just urge them to be cautious and maybe to try to initiate some protocols, maybe some sit-stays for visitors, maybe even having the pig on a leash sitting next to them when visitors come, and having visitors toss food. Again, a little bit of classical conditioning. Oh, wow, those people come in and, food flies in front of me. And then eventually maybe even working up to having visitors ask them to do stuff for them. These guys are so much fun when they know tricks. The first time I ever saw an animal do one of those, I'm sure there's a name for it and I'm blanking out, just offer up everything in its repertoire, was when I took a pig on a interview on a TV program one time, and it was really hard to talk to the lady. I was laughing so hard. The pig knew I had the treats and we were working with it, and it's sitting in front of me while I'm trying to talk to the interviewer, and it's spinning and it's sitting and it's waving and it's just going through everything it knows. They will work so hard for food. They are a blast. It's just if you just build that relationship with them. And then, of course, the alternative is just confine them away from visitors. For people that don't want to go to all that work, I said just let them, they don't need to meet all your friends. I think like some dogs, again, these animals just aren't equipped to meet strangers. That's not in their DNA. That's not what they do. Some big issues with children. Again, some people some of the pig people will jump all over me if I say anything about pigs and kids, because sometimes they do great, but sometimes that it can be a problem. So I just urge a lot of parental supervision. And again, that pig needs to know skills, and kids need to know skills. I don't think this is a pet for little children that can't learn things. And lastly, again, it's really a lot of it is about purchasing from a reputable breeder if you want to start with a baby, because I do think there's a lot here to good genetics. But I would never tell somebody not to go adopt a pig from a sanctuary. There's too many great places out there that really do have lovely pigs that need homes. And this is, again, just one of the good stories of a pig that lives with children and does wonderful. So. If you want to get more specific about treatment of aggression, again, I'm just all into command, response, reward types of interactions. We already talked about that. Obviously, no punishment. I don't have to tell you that. Managing the environment and being sure that their environment allows them to practice those normal species-specific behaviors like foraging for their food, spending a lot of time foraging for their food. Oh, sorry, almost forgot. So again, normal behavior is really aggression towards a new conspecific. If you're introducing new pigs, I say do it, think cats, do it very gradually with something in between them in the beginning, let them get used to each other, and then provide them plenty of space for interaction, for their initial interactions, and be prepared for some fighting. There will be some. So if you can introduce them on either side of some kind of fencing or child gate, that's going to be ideal. But I tell people, if they're charging and salivating at each other on either side of a gate, they're not ready to get to be together, okay? They need to be separated for a while. Don't forget that the disparity in size may be helpful. I'm not necessarily saying great big adult pig, little tiny baby pig. That might not be good, but some disparity in size, because this is how they can look. This is just some of the video. Yeah, good boys, because they were being good for about 2 seconds. And then you can see how, and because they have those tusk, they can be pretty harsh, yeah. These guys are doing better now, though, but unfortunately it took drugs. Again, we can go on and on, but I think some of these guys, when they're weaned too early, are also very socially inappropriate, and they don't learn a lot of what they need to interact. And so we have, in a few cases now, used medication to help them, and it again, anecdotally does seem to help. Most of the time, pigs are good with other pets. I don't necessarily recommend this, but I was always amazed at how often I saw pigs love birds, and I think it's because they like cleaning up under the bird feeders and also having the birds scratch their back. But I always urge, caution, especially around dogs. This, obviously, not too scary, but this is what we need to be aware of, right? This dog says, let's play, and this pig says, huh? Because that's not communication that goes both ways. And I think what happens most often with dogs and pigs is the dog may say, let's play, and the pig starts running, and the dog says, let's eat. And I've known people who came home to this. I've known people who came home to dead pigs after their pigs and dogs have lived together for years. And we had some pigs who had no ears from having lived with dogs. So this can, I just again say, lots and lots of caution about pigs with dogs.